Welcome back, quilting friends. Thank you for hanging in there with me for the 4 videos prior to this. This is our 5th and final video where we are demonstrating how to attach the binding to the actual quilt. I have to tell you that as I am editing this video and piecing the clips together, I am, I guess there's no other word to describe it, but just severely disappointed that somehow this last video was recorded without audio. So I will do my very best to voice over sections of the video that I think are critical. And I think this starting point is one of those sections. So as you are laying out your binding on your quilt, you do want to be mindful and make sure that you are attaching the binding such that the raw edges of the binding are facing the same direction as the raw edges of the quilt. There have been a number of times that I've started to quilt on, or I'll say attach the binding only to find out that I had it flipped. So that's something that you definitely want to pay attention and keep an eye out for. The other thing is when you are starting your binding, you want to start with about 10 inches of the binding free and clear because you will need that amount of free binding when you come back around to your starting point to attach the 2 pieces. So other than that, to start, you just make sure that you have your binding lined up as straight as you can with the quilt, and then you want to attach it using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So in this video, you see here that I am beginning that process of actually attaching the binding to the quilt. So I'm going to pause for now, and then as we get to the edge of the, well, I guess we're here now. As we get to the edge of the quilt, the bottom portion of it, you'll notice that I'm going to stop and measure 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom edge of the quilt. That's the stopping point. So you want to use a ruler. In this case, I'm using a seam guide so that you can mark off the 1/4 inch space, and you want to take your needle up to that space and stop. When I'm attaching my bindings, I take my stitch up to that marking point, which is 1/4 of an inch away from the bottom of the quilt. I mark it off, and then I do a few back stitches to secure the stitch, and I break thread so that I can take the quilt out from under the needle to rotate it. Here you see me approaching the spot that I've marked off the 1/4 inch stopping point. You may have noticed the quick back stitch there. Here I have taken the quilt out from under the needle, and at this point you will want to fold the binding back such that you're creating a diagonal, and then you want to create an L, if you will, kind of like when we were putting the binding together, and then you want to fold it back over itself so that you begin to come down the next side of the quilt. So you will see that take place here next in the video. So here you see the 45-degree angle after having folded the fabric back. And then the next thing you will see is me wrapping the binding back over itself so that it begins to edge up and line up with the bottom side of the quilt. So once you have this part of the quilting, or once you have this part of the process completed, you'll see that I'm going to rotate the quilt and then place it back under the needle. I will secure that folded piece with a few back stitches, and then I will just continue to stitch the binding down that separate side of the quilt. And then the key is really to continue to follow that same process until you have stitched the binding on all four sides of the quilt. You will eventually find your way back to the starting point, and I will pause the video. It looks like we're at that point now. So you can see I am overlapping the two free pieces of the quilt binding. Um, you want to overlap the quilt binding based on the width of your binding. So in this case, we're using a 2.5 inch binding. So you want the two pieces of fabric to overlay by 2.5 inches, and then you will attach them. So I'm going to pause again. Once you have the binding attached to the front, you'll want to, I like to take it to the iron and iron it out flat so that I can have an easier time of wrapping the binding around to the back. So that's what you see here. You see me wrapping the binding around the back of the quilt and securing it with pins. And once you have that all completed, then you are going to attach the binding to the back of the quilt. I am using a 1/8 inch left compensating foot to do that because I like to have that stitch very close to the edge of the binding. You don't need this foot to do this. You can definitely attach your binding with your 1/4 inch foot. One thing I do want to note is as you're beginning to do the final attachment, which is around to the back or the front, depending on how you attach the binding to begin with, it's good to go slow in this process so that you can make sure the fabric stays under the needle and you don't mistakenly take any of your stitches off the binding. But I think because I've recorded this video with no audio for some reason, I'm definitely going to include a link in this video to a video that I find very helpful when it's time to attach the two pieces of binding on the front when you're completing that part of the quilt. So for this video, you can see that the binding is fully attached. The quilt is completed, and here I'm showing you the front of the quilt and now the back of the quilt. And I'm sure I was saying some incredibly witty things that just did not get recorded. So we've made it to the final video and actually the final step. So here is the entirely quilted video hanging back up on the design wall so that you can see the completed project. So thank you for sticking in there with me. My apologies that for some reason this last video did not record the audio. So I will very likely do another beginner series just because of this glitch. But I hope that you have enjoyed this series and that you've been able to take something away that you can use in the production of your first quilt. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm more than happy to expand on any of the ideas or topics that I've presented in this video series. So I'm very much looking forward to growing this community with you, and I will be posting a new video soon. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for stitching with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more quilting tips and tutorials. Until next time, happy quilting.